Pinball circuit activated. Pinball circuit activated.
Steve Austin, astronaut, a man barely alive. Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology.
Episode 4, $6 Million Man, stencil time. Okay, what you're gonna need to stencil. You need your stencils, obviously. I use Pinball Pimp. I don't think anybody else is really making decent stencils. You can have someone cut them if you want, especially if the Pinball Pimp doesn't have them. He does generally keep a lot of the ones around though, so he's got a pretty good selection. You need your paint, obviously. I've used Rust-Oleum. Don't use Rust-Oleum. It dries too fast, and it has a really bad tendency to pull strings when you're pulling the stencil. I used to use Montana White, but they quit making Montana White. So now I am trying Montana Hardcore, which is a gloss acrylic spray paint. And the Montana White actually pulls really nicely on the stencils, and it doesn't leave a lot of strings and things. So, and this is Madrid Red, which is a good solid red that I'm just gonna try. You need some half full or full paint cans to weight down your stencil. I like to have an X-Acto knife and a razor blade. You're gonna need some blue painter's tape. This burnishing tool comes with the Pinball Pimp stencils usually. You need some scissors. You need newsprint or whatever you want to use to protect the rest of the cabinet. And then I really like this Tamiya masking tape. It comes in several different sizes. You can get it off of Amazon, you can get it at hobby stores, but it will give you a nice sharp line versus this will not. Do not try and mask off lines with this, because a lot of times these stencils, they don't go all the way to the edge. So the original art may not have gone all the way to the edge, okay? I like mine to go to the edge. So what I'll do is I'll extend these lines out with the Tamiya tape to be the actual line where we're gonna get the paint. And then I'll put the blue masking tape on top when I mask everything else off. Okay, so let's get going. There's nothing really magical about it, just get it where it's straight. And then the big thing to look for is where it is when it's aligned to the bottom, because you really want to make sure that's correct. So once you've got your stencil kind of aligned where you want it, you're going to want to weight it down with some paint cans. All right, so stencil's where I want it. You need scissors and a burnishing tool. What you're going to do is you're going to make a hinge. So I hinge from the side that has the more complicated art on it, or whichever side is the one that I really want to be absolutely correct, which most of the time is the front, but you can do however you like. So you're just going to peel back the stencil from the backing, just trying to be sure you don't move too much at all. Don't move at all. Now you're going to take your burnishing tool, and this is key. You're going to come from the center to the edge. Once you get the center down, then you come do the other sides. And that is my very strong advice. Do it that way. All right, these can come off now. Now, what I'm gonna do, so I'm gonna lift this up. Okay, we have a hinge now, right? So what you're gonna do now is peel back the backing, okay? And you can make this a 2-person job, it can be a 1-person job, whatever. So you're gonna do this way. Okay, so I've got the backing in my left hand, I got my burnishing tool in my right hand. And again, I go from the center first. The reason I do that is because in my experience, if you start going from the sides, you're way more likely to get off when you're putting this down. And once it's down, it's really not gonna come back up very well. Like, if it's a very uncomplicated stencil, you know, like an EM stencil or something, then you can kind of pull it back and reposition it. But once it, I mean, you really want this to go down correctly the first time. So just take your time. It's not a big deal. Just get it straight. Keep going. All right, you're good. All right, now you're gonna peel the top backing off. And the way to do this is to tear it and come this way. Whenever you're working with these stencils, you really want to try and make sure that you don't put shear stress on them, if that makes sense, because that's how they're gonna rip and tear and whatever. Now, this is a white cabinet, so it's a little bit harder to see the actual stencil versus the cabinet, so just be careful with what you're doing. Okay, so that pen stencil pull wasn't terrible. A couple little issues over there, but I think I can work around those. Now, I just go over everything with my finger as I'm taping things off. Now, this is where this, to me, a masking tape comes in. So if I have an edge that's an art edge, okay, like right here, this red line is supposed to be coming all the way to the edge. I'll go ahead and tape over the edge, just so I get a good sharp line all the way to the edge. That's just my own personal kind of anal way to do things, but it looks better. So it takes a little bit of extra time, but it's worth it. The other thing you really want to make sure, especially with a white base coat, is you want to make sure that you cover every single spot that is not supposed to get painted, because the last thing you're going to do is end up with a line of red where you don't want a line of red. Okay, so what I've done is I've taped everything off. I've got the newsprint down to protect the cabinet. I do like to put a little piece of masking tape over the registration mark. Technically on this first stencil, you don't really have to worry about it because that registration mark is in there and it's laser cut, so it's not gonna, you won't get paint bleed into that hole or the little cut. But on the second stencil, you absolutely have to put a piece of masking tape over that registration mark, or you will get a nice little square outline in a color that you don't want. All right, so now I'm just gonna go over all my edges. Make sure everything's down well before I spray. This is kind of where you take your last sanity moment, because once you start spraying, things go a little faster. Okay. Now I'm just gonna start taking all of our stuff off here. Now the nice thing with the Montana paint is it's a lot more forgiving than Rust-Oleum as far as dry time. Okay, Rust-Oleum, if you use Rust-Oleum, you better pull that stencil quick. Because again, the Rust-Oleum tends to really get very stringy very quickly. And then you see these people on Pinside that show like these horror stories of their stenciling where it looks like a disaster. And everyone's like, oh, it looks great. It looks like a disaster. So just use good paint, honestly. I used Rust-Oleum for my first, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 games. And then I discovered Montana, and I never went back. And honestly, the Montana paint is oftentimes less expensive than the Rust-Oleum paint. So it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, in my opinion, to use Rust-Oleum. Now, there's probably somebody that's gonna go, well, I've used Rust-Oleum and it's great. Fantastic. Congratulations. I have never been able to get it to work quickly. All right, so now when I pull a stencil, I like to have my X-Acto knife and my razor blade at the ready, okay? So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start at the top, because this is easy. Okay. So, you can see I already did the other side of the art. I let that dry for 2 days so it doesn't have a risk of getting marred up, you know, indentions or whatever from the towels. And I got the other side done just now. So that's how you pull a stencil. Really, my advice is, number one, use good paint. Use Montana paint, or oh, what's the other one? There's another one that's good. Can't remember it right now. There is no way, I'll tell you, I've gotten pretty decent at stenciling cabinets, and this pattern in Rust-Oleum absolutely would have had strings all over it. It just dries too fast. And then it really likes to get elastic and pull strings when it's at that weird stage of drying. So take your time. If you use good paint, you've got more time than you think. Don't rush. Try to keep your fingers out of the paint. And try to not let if you're gonna have a piece of the stencil tear, it's always better to cut it with a razor blade at a controlled spot so you don't have a big piece of it flop over into the paint. And just do it. So that's it. That's one side done. We got to get the head done. And then once that's dry, I'm going to do the front, because on this game, the front, the art kind of connects a little bit with the sides. And so when I have that situation, I always do the side art first, because that way I can then kind of adjust the front to be correct if I have to. You'll notice I was measuring a lot before I put the stencil. When I put that stencil down, I was really trying to make sure that this angle right here was at the exact same spot on that side, so then the front will be straight. problem that you have is that this is a longer piece, right? So if you do the front first, if you're off by a 1/16 of an inch on the front and you try and match this up, that whole thing's gonna be now wonky, or much lower than the other side. So I just do it that way. So this got both sides are red now. The red's done. I've got to do the red on the side of the head, which is super easy. It's just 2 diamonds, 2 little zaggy looking things, whatever. And then I'm going to do the front tomorrow. And then I'll let this whole thing dry for 2 or 3 days before I come back and try and stencil the blue. Because again, I really want to make sure that this paint is cured and as hard as I can get it before I'm going to try and pull blue off. I've never had a problem, knock on wood, with Montana paint pulling up once it's down. Like I said before, I have had issues with the base coat paint, but not since I started using that Sherwood, what is it? Clark and Kensington hybrid acrylic stuff. Alkyd enamel is what it's called. So, I'm gonna start stenciling the blue. This red has had about 4 days to dry, 3-4 days. And I like to give the paint plenty of time to dry before I try and stencil it again, just so it doesn't pull up. This one's a little bit different on the head here because there's no registration marks. And that is because it's basically just a straight, make sure it's on there evenly and it's square to the sides and everything. It's a little bit odd. This is the first one I've had that didn't have registration marks. And there is, you do have to make sure that you get it on there correctly because there are stars that are going to go inside of the red. So this one, I'm just going to make sure that I got it on straight. Once again, when you're doing your work with burnishing it down with the burnishing tool, just make sure that you go from the inside, go from the center out, so you don't end up with issues there. The other thing you can run into with these ones that have, excuse me, kind of thin stripes on them, is the thin stripes don't adhere as well, especially on the edges, over near the edges of the stencil, because there's just not that much material there to get a good seal. So you just got to make sure that before you spray, you make sure that you're pushing down those edges as best you can, or you can get a lot of bleed through problems. Now with stars in general, or any other kind of small detail, there's a good risk that you're going to pull up some of it as you're pulling this backing off. So my advice is just be extra careful and watch as you're going. And if you can see, I kind of rock it back and forth a little bit just to make sure that I'm not putting too much pressure on any one given spot when I'm pulling this off. So that you just try and make sure that you're not going to pull things up that you don't need to pull up. I'm going to get all of it in there. You can also, if you see parts of it starting to pull up a little bit, okay, like see right there, that just ripped. So I'm going to go back. We're going to come across. So that was a little bitty stripe that just ripped. Now luckily that's a stripe, so that's easily replicated with my Tamiya masking tape. But that is exactly what happened right there. So I got the rest of the stripe off, but that rip is right there. So what I'm going to have to do is just tape over that with the Tamiya tape and fix that. But that's the kind of thing you don't want to have happen. I just did it right there. These little bitty narrow stripes are kind of a pain, I'm not gonna lie, because they will rip on you in a heartbeat. So if you pull perpendicular, you don't want to put shearing force on it because that's going to stretch it and make it not adhere. So try and have your angle that you're pulling at be kind of perpendicular to the line. So you're not pulling, like if the line's going this way, I don't want to pull that way, if that makes sense. Because that will make it shear off a lot easier and it'll stretch the vinyl. And once the vinyl stretches, it's really hard to get it to go back down correctly. All right, here's another little star. Just gonna try and be careful with it. Make sure I don't rip it. There we go. All right, so now I'm gonna go through and use my Tamiya masking tape and mask everything off that is a sharp edge that I want a good line on, including that part that ripped. So where I'm at now is I have taped off all of the lines that I need. I've used the yellow Tamiya tape on any area that I have to have a straight line. And all I use the blue masking tape for is to attach the paper to the yellow tape, okay? Other tip is make sure, I've also used, as you can see, a drop cloth here. I wrap it around the head itself and then I just tape it in. And that's just because I've had issues before where paint will float around and you'll get this little tint of paint that you don't want on white. So when you're going to spray, just make sure, once again, I'm going to go over the areas one more time, just make sure everything is stuck down well so we can get the sharpest lines we can. Now this, once again, this is Montana Hardcore. This color is called Neptune Blue, and this is not the stock cap. The stock cap on these comes out really fast, and I actually don't like the way it comes out. It comes out too heavy. So this is what's called a medium fine cap, I believe. You can buy these off of Amazon. They come in packs, and it controls the spray a lot better. So I'm going to open up the garage door a little bit, and we're going to get painting. So if you're working with the Montana paint, what you want to do, especially with this hardcore stuff, is spray it on and give it a second because it kind of almost coalesces on itself in a way. And it'll kind of come together without you having to spray as much as you think on there. And I wear latex gloves when I'm doing this stuff because you will get paint on your fingers, number one. And number two, oh, that's gonna pull it up. Oh, no, it came up, okay. If you don't wear gloves and you get paint on your fingers will leave a much bigger fingerprint problem on your finish if you happen to touch a color you don't need to touch than a glove will. Okay, so I'm ready to start pulling the actual stencil now. What I want for this is a pair of tweezers and an X-Acto knife. And you just start at an edge. I gotta get this up first. Here. There you go. So I'm just gonna start at an edge and start pulling this. And we'll try and do this in time lapse so you don't get bored. All right, so all in all, that went pretty well. There's one little spot here where it ripped, where I didn't get the tape line exactly right. I can touch that up with some brush paint, fix a little thing here or there, but otherwise that went pretty well. So there you go, that's the head stenciled.